Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing Astra. This was directed by James Gray and stars Brad Pitt, Tommy Lee Jones, Donald Sutherland and Liv Tyler. The film really focuses on astronaut Roy McBride, played by Brad Pitt, and after a variety of solar flares are hitting the Earth and causing a lot of damage, he is given a particular mission where he has to travel across the unforgiving solar system to uncover the truth about his missing father. On his particular journey, he uncovers things that will challenge the human nature and our place in the cosmos. I think James Gray's really outdone himself with this film. It's absolutely amazing. It's beautiful to look at, and it's such an engaging and interesting story he's created here. It really looks at the near future, and it looks at space travel in a different way that's not so sci-fi-ish or so futuristic, but it's sort of simple and realistic. It feels like where we could have been or could be with space travel in the future. There's a simplicity to it. He sort of, throws you into this world and we get to see it. He doesn't hold your hand and tell you everything about it and give you all the information that you need. You work it all out as you go along. Brad Pitt's characters are our eyes into the world, so everything he sees and hears, we see and hear. It all feels very realistic, even down to the space travel, traveling from Earth to the moon, and it feels like as if we would be catching commercial flight. It's sort of simple like that. I like the look and the feel of the places we go, such as the moon. And throughout the film, depending on where Brad Pitt's character goes, the color palette changes. So on the moon it's very dark and it's very grey, and then we get to Mars, it's very reddish orange color. It's like a desert. It's very desolate as well, but the color looks very different and the way it's shot is very different. And I think what it does really well is it doesn't have to explain everything to the audience like a lot of sci-fi films. I find a lot of the sci-fi films these days, when they try and get into explaining everything, it sort of loses the audience and they feel a bit disconnect. But doing it this way, we only learn small bits of information through the film and we're not told everything. We can sort of put it together ourselves, and it's very simple and an easy story to follow, rather than a lot of the sci-fi we see today. Watching this film, you could tell James Gray was very inspired by a lot of other sci-fi films, such as 2001, and you can really see this with the space travel and how things move through space, and especially the trip he goes from Earth to the moon on this particular spaceship and how that sort of works. There's a big feeling of The Martian, especially when she goes to Mars. The way it looks and feels and the world we're exposed to there feels a lot like The Martian. There's a lot of Interstellar in it as well, because it's a kind of a spiritual journey for Roy McBride, for Brad Pitt's character, and the journey he goes on is kind of spiritual and trying to save the Earth sort of as well, like McConaughey's in Interstellar, and it sort of has a bit of that feel as well. And also another film that's not really part of the sci-fi genre, it's a war film, is ultimately Apocalypse Now. A friend pointed this out to me, that ultimately Roy McBride's character and the journey he goes on to find this particular man and the things he goes through and the mysteries and the horrors and the variety of things that he experiences and witnesses along this journey is very reminiscent of Martin Sheen's character, Benjamin Willard, in Apocalypse Now and the journey he goes on. I feel what he really has done is he's been inspired by this. He hasn't really stolen from them. He's been inspired by them and taken what he wants from them and made it his own, and I really love that. The film moves at a particular pace and it doesn't change, it just goes along its pace, and things happen along the way. It feels like a horror movie structure in a way that we learn things and we introduce to the characters and it's simple, then something will happen and then there's a moment to breathe before we get into the next thing, and it kind of kept it so captivating, and it wasn't just a one-note film and it wasn't just these long drawn out takes that didn't serve any purpose. Things actually happened within the movie from time to time, and every place he went was different and the experiences were different. I love the look of each of the places we went to. I love the moon base that they have, seems very realistic. The same with the Mars base. The spaceships and rockets are very realistic and feel very real. It was so well done, I was hard pressed to really pick out any of the visual effects or CGI or anything like that. It was so well done and so realistic. Like the moon base looks fantastic. And so does the Mars base. It just feels very real. And that's what I would say most about this film, is a very real feeling movie. It's a world you feel we could be in the future. It's a world I felt like I could inhabit. I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to experience the things that Roy McBride was experiencing. I wanted to be part of this very interesting and unique world that we were presented with. It's kind of an interesting thing that there's a voiceover that goes through it, explains certain things, and ultimately when Brad Pitt's character gets to the moon, it shows how it's sort of become commercialized now. The trip to the moon is something that happens every day, all the time, and it's very commercialized. And it starts to ask the question and really talk about how what we do on Earth we'll probably end up doing to other places if we were to venture out into the universe and sort of make it very commercial. And it's the same sort of thing. It's like going to other countries and making it very commercialized at all the touristy things you go to see, and it just sort of takes away from the experience. And I felt that was very clever. It's beautifully shot, this film. Every shot in it serves a purpose. It's beautifully put together and executed, and with each place he goes, the way the stuff shot on the moon is very different the way stuff shot on Mars, and when we get to the Jupiter and in the spaceships and on Earth as well. It's just beautifully put together, and I would be really surprised if this film wasn't nominated for Best Cinematography, because I thought it was just breathtaking to watch. It was so beautifully done. The acting is brilliant in this. Brad Pitt is phenomenal in this, so fantastic. He underplays his character so well. I hadn't really seen him play a character like this before, and he's so fantastic in it. He wears every emotion and every thought on his face. He doesn't always have to explain or say anything for him to convey what he's feeling. The voiceover adds a bit to it, so we get to hear internal thoughts, but really the performance is just him wearing it on his face, and I absolutely love that. He plays such an interesting character. When you first meet him, you feel he's emotionless. He's disconnected from everything, from his girlfriend Eve, played by Liv Tyler, from the world around him. He's only focused on his job. That's the only thing that means anything, and that relates to the way his father was. His father was very driven, and his father left when Roy was only 16 and disappeared when he was 26. And he really hasn't got to know his father. He only sees him as one particular thing, and that sort of affects his path and his choices along the way. But even though he feels and seems emotionless, things transpire through the film, and you can really sense that he struggles with it, but he puts on a brave face. He puts up this facade to show people, and he talks about that in the film as well, that he just smiles and puts on this thing, but that's not really how he feels or thinks or who he is. But he feels he wants to be a bit like his father was, like his hero, and that's what he sees him to be, and he wants to be exactly like him. But as the film goes along, we see his father isn't quite what he seems, and we learn more about it in the film. I don't want to give too much away there. The closer he gets to his father, the more emotional he becomes, the more emotion he exudes and shows. But he's such a calm and collected character when something bad happens or something goes wrong. He just jumps into action. He doesn't try and overthink anything. He just acts. And he's able to do that in such a great way. He always has a plan, an idea. His mind works really quickly, and you see what he does through actions rather than words, and I love that. And he's a very driven character in that regard. No matter what happens, he just goes with it, and he deals with whatever comes up. In a lot of ways, he reminded me of Cliff Booth, the character that Brad Pitt plays in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That there's just these two men that sort of regretful in a way, but they just sort of keep going no matter what. They move forward, they don't panic or stress, and they just go with whatever's happening in the circumstances they find themselves in. And they're very capable men, and that's the relatability between these two. And Brad Pitt's talked about, pulling away from acting a bit more. If he was not to act anymore, I think this performance in this film and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are the two of the finest performances he's given, and it would be a beautiful way for him to go out if he decides to do that. And it really is a spiritual journey for this character. He has an arc, which is really great. He starts in one place and ends up in another place at the end of the film. And he's learnt so much. He's learnt to forge his own path and not have to follow in the footsteps of his father, which he felt he had to. And he sort of learns so much and accepts so much and lets go of all the things he's been struggling with or fighting against. And it's such a pure and beautiful character and very realistic in that regard. I think Tommy Lee Jones is really great. I think this is one of the best roles he's had in a long time, and he gives a really great performance. He's not in a lot of the film, but the scenes he is in serves a lot of purpose, and he's so fantastic. And the chemistry and relationship you can really sense between him and Brad Pitt's character is really fantastic to watch on screen. There's other actors in here who have minor roles, such as Donald Sutherland. He sort of appears as sort of a mentor and friend to Roy McBride's character, and he starts Roy on this particular journey. Ruth Negga is really interesting in it, plays a small role but pivotal and is important to the story, and she ultimately helps Roy along the way, which I really liked. Liv Tyler's in it. She doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but I got a sense from her she's sort of like the heart of Roy in a lot of ways. She's something he connected to as a human being, but he pushed away from. And so she's kind of an interesting character within the storyline too, I think. There's some really fantastic sequences that happen in this film I really loved. I love the start sequence where he's on this sort of thing just above the earth, and what transpires that because of the solar flares is really, really great. And it shows him as a man who doesn't panic under pressure or stress. He just works out what he has to do. I love the sequence when he travels from the earth to the moon. That whole sequence is really great, and you get a real sense of the space travel there, and like I said, it's like us catching an aeroplane or commercial flight, which I really love. Then when he gets to the moon, I love the design of the moon station, the way it looks, and it's so fantastically put together. And there's this really, really great space buggy chase that happens within this sort of sequence, which is absolutely breathtaking to watch. You're on this edge of your seat. It's very quiet in moments because you're in space, and how gravity sort of works and the effect that has on the particular chase itself is absolutely brilliant. I love all the stuff on Mars. I love the Mars station there, what it looks like. I like the desolate sort of desert as part of that world. All the sequences of places he goes are fantastic. And when we see Jupiter, the rings of Jupiter, that's so brilliant. And there's this really great sequence at the end where he has to get back to his spaceship, which I didn't see coming, but I absolutely loved it. And this element felt a lot like the movie Gravity, but I thought it was executed much better, and it was a much more engaging scene and an element to the particular film. I was just absolutely blown away by this film. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was, and I loved every moment of it. A science fiction film about space travel to feel so real like this and so connected and interesting is absolutely brilliant. Like I said earlier, I love the fact it didn't have to explain everything. It used little bits of information, and the information that we saw was through Roy McBride's eyes, so it's just what he saw and what he gathered, and we didn't have to be explained everything, and the audience wasn't lost. They could go on the journey with the character. This film is slow moving. It does take its time, but I think a lot of the great science fiction films do that. But the slowness adds something to it, a spiritual element. It's just such a well-made film, and I was so impressed with it. Final thoughts. At the essence, this is really a father and son story. It's about a man who's ultimately modeled his whole life on his father. He looks up to his father. He feels his father's a hero, and he wants to be just like him. Like us as children, we look up to our parents. We don't see them as flawed beings. We see them larger than life in a lot of ways. And we feel that that's who we want to be when we're young. But when we grow up, we see they are normal. They are human beings. They do have their faults. They do have their struggles. And sometimes we don't want to be anything like them. We're able to direct our own path and choose our own direction. And that's what this film really does. Roy McBride's a character that's based himself so much on his father, disconnecting from everything. Science and space travel is all he really cares about. But as the film goes on, and when he meets his father, he realizes that he doesn't want to be like his father. He sees the sadness in his father. He sees the drive, and his father's just focused on one thing, that he misses everything else around him. Roy doesn't want to be like that, I felt, with this film. And there's the choices that he makes. He paves his own path. He chooses his own direction. And he realizes what's important and knows that putting himself completely in one thing is no way to live life. And I really loved that. I thought that was a really great element to it. There's so much to love about this movie, and if you're a science fiction fan, I highly recommend this. If you just want a really solid movie, I can't recommend this more. This is such a great film, and I love so much about it. And it's a film I'd like to revisit. The spiritual element to the film I really connected to, and I really was fascinated by and drawn into. I like the idea of arcs for characters, especially spiritual journeys, and I think the science fiction genre opens it up to be a more spiritual film in many ways. It is about going off into the unknown, going off into the universe we don't know, and wondering if there is other life out there besides us and what that sort of means. It can be very lonely, this sort of journey you go through in life. And the space is a great metaphor for that, the loneliness that you feel when you go on this particular, when you pave your own path, when you start to see what's important in life and you start to realize what you want to pursue and what you want around you. I'm going to give Ad Astra 5 out of 5. I absolutely love this film. It is my top film of this year so far. Just such a great film. Not only the best film of this year so far, but it's one of my favorite films now. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.